Welcome, everyone, to CDO's magazine series of one-on-one interviews with CDOs, data leaders, and key influencers. I'm your host, Robert Lutton, Vice President, Sandal Consultants. I'm coming to you today from Toronto, Canada, working with the CDO magazine. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing Sid Dutta, who is the CEO and founder of Privaclave.
How would you see your organization addressing these specific challenges in the enterprise that face these security challenges today?
Yeah, so obviously, Privaclave, was created to address, some of the major, pain points that enterprises,
Sure.
have or struggle to implement, robust, data-centric security. So when we kind of, shift to the phrase of data protection by design and by default, I mean, it's a great philosophy, right? But it has not been practical, especially when you're dealing with a lot of legacy applications and services.
Sure.
And because they weren't designed with this principle in mind, right? And existing applications and services doesn't get to that state by design and by default automatically. So you have to basically do something to it. So it's kind of more about data protection by redesign, right, instead of by design. But that whole redesign of applications obviously becomes very expensive, very invasive, and then time consuming. And I've kind of lived that world for the last
Right.
decade, which is a big pain point. And hence, enterprises essentially don't, or can't afford sometimes to, take that measure. And that's why they rely on or resort to something that's more like compliance driven controls. But even with new applications, that are being developed, you could essentially think about baking in data protection, from a design perspective. But these new applications are not running in isolation. They are part of an ecosystem where there are
Sure.
other legacy applications. So you can't really have one application is by design, implementing data protection and the other is not. So that has been a challenge. So I think you ask 10 people about what they mean by data protection by design and default and how they're handling it, and you obviously get 10 different answers. So that's one piece which Privaclave was conceived, based on. The other challenge that I see currently in my several years dealing with data discovery, data and risk identification, and then eventually getting to remediating the risk is that there's a lack of continuum from the point of risk identification to the remediation part. So as I was talking about before, that we identify a risk, we scan and discover data, classify data, we understand lineage, we understand access, but at the end of the day, it gets to a point of a massive report of findings that someone has to essentially prioritize from a risk perspective and then eventually take action on it. So this continuous bridge that needs to be built, that's also something that on the Privaclave side we try to address. So though I would say, those are some of the biggest challenges that Privaclave is solving is one, that how can you make the data-centric protection and implementing the effectiveness of application level encryption and tokenization entirely non-invasively, automatically, and transparently without touching, any of your applications or even changing your application data flows. And then also how you surface the risk in a continuous basis, as data is being moving, from one place to the other through APIs, through file dump and moving over to cloud analytics or shared to third parties. How do you have a continuous way of understanding what data is moving and what data is being shared instead of having a one-time, scan of a data store and never going back to it in months or a year later. So these are like 3 or 4 different areas where I found the data protection frameworks have been lacking, and hence the elevation of the data security posture for enterprises haven't gotten to a point to effectively protect their data and prevent data breaches.
Well, I certainly love the fact that it's data protection by redesign and by default. But can I ask you, what sets Privaclave apart from the other data protection solutions that are currently in the marketplace today?
Yeah, I mean, I think, of course, the very, very good solutions in the market, and certainly I've led, one of the products in my career, and I've used a lot of those across being on the enterprise side. But I think what differentiates, Privaclave from the incumbent solution is one, of course, as I talked about, the invasiveness is not there. So business applications do not require any modifications, and that kind of saves several months of development, testing, and deployment efforts and hundreds and thousands of dollars. because I used to write the check, to business for doing that work.
Right.
I ran the data protection program before. There is no disruption of the business processes and operations. So while introducing Privaclave into the enterprise, and given it's entirely decoupled from the application stack, it also avoids a lot of operational hassles and costs, like upgrades or patches, to the solution. And then, of course, it's application platform language, runtime, it's all agnostic. So we don't have any language specific or platform specific or cloud specific, SDKs or agents or libraries to be incorporated. Enterprise don't even need to implement any encryption gateways or proxies across the network, to hairpin traffic, and then reroute those traffic towards them in order to get that data detected and classified and if required, protected. Obviously, it offers that real-time and runtime sensitive data detection across any data pipeline or inter-service communication. And it's not a point-in-time targeted data discovery. And the best part is that it enables enterprises to build that continuum, elevate or automatically progress from sensitive data detection to sensitive data, protection.
So you mentioned that it's got no SDKs. So how does Privaclave integrate with the existing enterprise systems to enhance the overall security aspect based upon the fact that it's non-invasive, it's decoupled from the stack, it's got new SDKs. How do you integrate with the existing systems?
Yeah, so I think we take advantage of obviously a lot of the API layer and the different pipeline, data pipeline components, to essentially trigger us independently and automatically. It's basically a configuration setting. Now, when it
Right.
comes to integrating with existing enterprise systems, obviously we heavily integrate with the enterprise identity access management systems or IDPs, particularly in the aspect of who gets to see the data, particularly when it comes to decryption or detokenization of that data. Every single operation that's happening is logged, and essentially we integrate with the enterprise SIEM platforms to have a very solid understanding of what's going on in the network and essentially help in triggering some alerts or interception of processes to identify if any exfiltration that's happening. The other cases also, like enterprises may actually have existing investments in their key managers or tokenization engines and encryption engines. So we kind of have that ability to integrate with a third party capability when it comes to protecting the data. So someone may have an investment in one solution and they want to continue to do that and make Privaclave that non-invasive vehicle for them to not to have to touch the application and yet desensitize that data. So our third-party connectors basically integrates it behind the seat. So there's no requirement for the application teams to integrate anymore with those encryption and tokenization or key management APIs. And of course, across various use cases. So we are kind of ubiquitous and we are ephemeral as well, because you don't need to have a static infrastructure for Privaclave to run. So we get spun up, we do the work, and then basically we spin off. And then basically at that point of time, data flows as is, applications work as is, and yet data is persistently protected. In a lot of cases, customers may not want to protect it immediately. They may want to have a more reporting aspect to understanding what is flowing across the network. And then that risk can get surfaced, and then they can make a decision where they want to start essentially obfuscating data.
So, Sid, just a final question here. We talked about the LLM applications and generative AI risks. What is Privaclave doing to address them from your point of view?
Yeah, so obviously, Privaclave is very, very focused on the privacy and security, principle of the responsible AI framework, right? And to uphold that, principle, we have obviously, focused mostly on the vulnerabilities and the risks, particularly with sensitive information disclosure, and sometimes on training data poisoning or insecure output handling as well. So Privaclave provides enterprises with this transparent, non-invasive solution for integrating the effective data sanitization and scrubbing techniques. So it ensures that sensitive data does not enter the training model, even during the model enrichment or fine-tuning process. It detects and sanitizes, sensitive information at runtime. through the pre-training and embedding stages. And also it understands, what inputs, are being sent to the LLMs or what outputs are being retrieved out of the LLMs. And so it detects and classifies and sanitizes it. But it's all through its AI-driven automation and non-invasive in design, where current applications that have integrated with large language models need not have to be changed. And Privaclave just as this transparent layer, which is ensuring that it handles the security aspect of it, ensuring high performance and scalability. So in fact, we are leveraging the power of AI and large language models to secure data exchanges with large language models.
Sid, there is no one better than yourself from Privaclave that I'd far rather have handling my security side. So on behalf of the CDO magazine, we really appreciate the time, the discussion in depth, and also your knowledge. We certainly hope that we'll have a chance to have you come back, share your knowledge and experience on cybersecurity, data protection, data privacy, and generative AI. So thank you indeed for your time today, Sid.
Oh, it was a pleasure talking to you, Robert, and thank you for having me. And I think I really enjoyed the conversation, and I'm looking forward to having many more.
Indeed. And for our listeners, please visit cdomagazine.tech for additional interviews. Thank you.